The lecture hall buzzed with the sound of 30 different species trying to find comfortable positions in chairs designed for the average galactic citizen. Professor Helm watched his students settle in, his scarred reptilian face showing the patience that came from decades of teaching at the Galactic Military Academy. Today would be interesting, he knew. The final question of the semester always brought out the best and worst in his cadets. Alex Reed sat in the back corner, notebook ready and stylus in hand. The human had learned early in the semester that this particular spot offered the best view of the entire classroom, while keeping attention away from himself. It was a survival skill he had developed over the months of being the only human in a class, filled with beings who could crush, slice, or dissolve him without much effort. The Drex students dominated the front rows, their massive frames requiring the reinforced seating. Their natural armor gleamed under the artificial lights, and their claws tapped impatiently against their desks. Roth, the largest among them, kept flexing his muscles in a way that made the metal chair creak ominously. Behind them, the Mantari cadets sat perfectly still, their compound eyes constantly scanning the room. Swift, their unofficial leader, had not moved a single limb for the past 10 minutes, yet everyone could sense the coiled energy ready to explode into motion. The crystalline quartz beings had chosen seats near the room's power conduits, their translucent bodies humming with absorbed energy. Prism, the most accomplished of their group, occasionally flickered with brief displays of light that cast rainbow patterns on the walls. The effect was beautiful and slightly unnerving, especially when the colors shifted to angry reds during heated discussions. In the middle section, the gaseous nebulons had created their own seating arrangements using containment fields. Cloud, their representative, existed as a shimmering blue-green mist that occasionally formed what might have been a face when addressing others directly. The nebulon's voice came through a translator device, giving their words an ethereal quality that many found either soothing or disturbing. Professor Helm cleared his throat, a sound that carried enough authority to silence every conversation in the room. His yellow eyes swept across the assembled cadets, taking in their eager faces and tense postures. This was his favorite class of the year, not because of the subject matter, but because of what it revealed about each species' character. Today we conclude our study of galactic warfare with a question that has been debated in military academies across known space for centuries. Helm began, his voice carrying the weight of experience earned in a dozen different conflicts. You have studied the great battles, analyzed the strategies of legendary commanders, and learned the capabilities of every major military force in our galaxy. Now I ask you this: what is the deadliest species in known space? The reaction was immediate and predictable. Every cadet straightened in their seats, minds already racing through the lessons of the past months. Alex watched as subtle displays of species pride began to manifest around the room. The Drex flexed their claws, the Mantari's antennae twitched with anticipation, the quartz beings brightened noticeably, and Cloud's mist swirled in what might have been excitement. Before you answer, Helm continued, raising one scaled hand to forestall the eager responses. Remember that this is not about individual combat prowess. We are discussing species-level capabilities. What makes one people more dangerous than another when considered as a galactic force? Roth's massive hand shot up first, followed quickly by several others. The Drex cadet's confidence was typical of his species, built on millennia of military dominance across dozens of worlds. Professor, the answer seems obvious. The Drex have conquered more worlds than any other species in the past 1,000 years. Our natural weapons, armor, and tactical superiority speak for themselves. Swift's response came so quickly it overlapped with Roth's final words. Speed defeats strength every time. The Mantari expansion covered twice as many systems in half the time. Numbers and coordination will always overcome individual power. The debate was beginning exactly as Helm had expected. Each species would present their case based on their greatest strengths, completely blind to the bigger picture. He had seen this same discussion play out hundreds of times over his teaching career, and yet it never failed to provide valuable lessons about perspective and assumptions. Prism's crystalline form pulsed with soft light as the quartz being prepared to speak. Both physical prowess and speed become irrelevant when facing energy manipulation on a stellar scale. The Quartz Collective can harness the power of stars themselves. No armor or speed can protect against a solar flare directed by conscious will. Cloud's gaseous form rippled with what might have been amusement, solid thinking from solid beings, came the translated voice, carrying just enough condescension to make the other cadets bristle. But what use is any weapon when your enemy can infiltrate your ships, your bases, even your bodies? The Nebulans wage war from within. Alex continued taking notes, his stylus moving steadily across the tablet. He found the discussion fascinating, not because of the military applications, but because of what each argument revealed about how these species viewed conflict itself. Each was trapped by their own evolutionary advantages, unable to see beyond the tools that had brought them to dominance. The human had spent the semester listening to lectures about galactic history, studying the rise and fall of empires, and learning about the various species that had shaped known space. What struck him most was not the differences between the various peoples, but the similarities in how they thought about power and survival. Professor Helm allowed the initial exchanges to continue for several minutes, watching as the debate grew more heated. Other species joined in, each presenting their case with growing passion. The energy-based photons were mentioned, beings of pure light who could travel at near light speed and phase through matter. The temporals earned discussion, creatures who could manipulate local time fields to age enemies into dust or accelerate their own healing beyond belief. Through it all, Alex remained silent. Several times, cadets glanced in his direction with expressions ranging from curiosity to dismissal. The human had participated in class discussions throughout the semester, but never with the passionate intensity shown by the others. His contributions were thoughtful and well-reasoned, but lacked the fierce pride that marked most military academy students. As the hour progressed, the arguments became more elaborate and more personal. Species pride was clearly at stake now, with each group determined to prove their superiority. Professor Helm recognized the signs and knew it was almost time for the lesson's real purpose to begin. Alex checked his chronometer and realized the class period was nearly over. The debate had been educational, but he suspected Professor Helm had something more planned than a simple discussion of military capabilities. The old Drex warrior's reputation suggested there was always a deeper lesson waiting beneath the surface. The stage was set. The players had revealed their hands, and now Alex wondered what would come next in this display of galactic military thinking. 20 minutes into the heated discussion, Professor Helm called for formal presentations. The casual arguing had served its purpose, revealing each species' immediate assumptions about their own superiority. Now came the real test of military thinking and strategic analysis. Roth stood first, his massive Drex frame casting shadows across half the classroom. The reptilian warrior activated the holographic display with a gesture that made his claws gleam under the lights. Images filled the air above the central projector, showing Drex forces in action across multiple worlds and time frames. The Drex have conquered 47 worlds in the last millennium, Roth began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone stating obvious facts. Our natural advantages are undeniable. The hologram shifted to show anatomical displays of Drex physiology. Retractable claws capable of cutting through most known materials. Armored hide that deflects energy weapons and projectiles alike. Internal organ redundancy that allows us to survive wounds that would kill most species instantly. The display changed to show battle footage. Drex warriors moving through hostile environments that would kill unprotected beings, their natural armor allowing them to fight in vacuum, underwater, or in the heart of volcanic regions. We don't need environmental suits or protective gear. Every Drex is born ready for war in conditions that would stop other species before they could even engage. Swift's antennae twitched impatiently as Roth continued his presentation, but the Mantari cadet waited for the proper moment to respond. Military academy protocols demanded respect for each speaker, even when disagreeing completely with their conclusions. Furthermore, Roth continued, our tactical adaptability is proven across dozens of different types of warfare. Close combat, siege operations, environmental warfare, psychological operations. The Drex military doctrine incorporates every form of conflict because our natural abilities allow us to excel in all of them. The holographic display showed impressive statistics. Casualty ratios heavily favoring Drex forces, successful planetary invasions completed in record time, and testimonials from defeated enemies acknowledging Drex military superiority. It was a compelling presentation that left little room for argument about their effectiveness as a military force. When Roth finished and returned to his seat, Swift was already rising. The Mantari's movement was so fluid and quick that several cadets blinked and found the insectoid already at the front of the room, activating the holographic controls before Roth had fully settled back into his chair. "Speed is the ultimate weapon," Swift began, immediately replacing Roth's images with footage of Mantari swarm tactics. While the Drex conquered 47 worlds in 1,000 years, the Mantari expansion covered 93 star systems in less than 5 centuries. When you can move faster than your enemy can react, their armor and weapons become meaningless. The hologram showed Mantari forces in action, and the difference from Drex tactics was immediately apparent. Where Drex warfare resembled an unstoppable avalanche of armored destruction, Mantari combat looked like controlled chaos. Thousands of insectoid forms moving in perfect coordination, striking from impossible angles, appearing and disappearing faster than most beings could track. Our compound eyes process visual information at speeds that make other species appear frozen in time, Swift explained. While the display showed comparative reaction time data, what seems like instantaneous response to you takes deliberate consideration for us. We see your attacks coming and have already moved to counter them before you complete the action. The presentation shifted to strategic implications. Mantari forces could redeploy across entire star systems faster than most species could organize defensive responses. Their coordination allowed them to appear as overwhelming numbers at critical points while maintaining minimal overall force requirements. The Drex speak of surviving hostile environments, Swift continued. But we make every environment hostile to our enemies. Desert worlds, ice planets, gas giants, asteroid fields. Terrain that stops other species becomes our advantage because we adapt our movement to any condition. Alex found himself genuinely impressed by both presentations. Each species had built their military doctrine around their natural strengths in logical and effective ways. The tactical applications were sound, the historical evidence compelling, and the strategic thinking sophisticated. Prism rose with characteristic crystalline grace, light patterns shifting across the quartz being's translucent form as emotional states influenced their energy absorption. The holographic display came alive with images that seemed to capture starlight itself, showing quartz beings manipulating forces that dwarfed planetary weapons. Physical combat becomes irrelevant when you can harness stellar energies, Prism stated, their translated voice carrying harmonics that suggested vast power held under careful control. Speed and armor mean nothing against directed solar radiation. The Quartz Collective doesn't fight battles on planetary surfaces because we don't need to. We conduct warfare on a cosmic scale. The hologram showed quartz fleets in space, their crystalline ships blazing with channeled starfire, energy beams that could slice through asteroids, defensive shields that could deflect projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed, and the ability to drain power from enemy vessels by absorbing their energy weapons output. Our expansion required no ground invasions, no lengthy sieges, no environmental adaptation, Prism continued. We simply appeared in each star system, demonstrated our capabilities, and offered the choice between alliance and annihilation. Most species chose wisely. The display showed comparative energy outputs. A single quartz being could channel enough power to supply a small city. A fleet of them could tap into stellar radiation on a scale that made conventional weapons appear as primitive as thrown stones. The Mantari speak of speed, but light itself is our weapon. The Drex mention armor, but we can generate temperatures that would vaporize any known material. When your capabilities operate on cosmic scales, planetary considerations become academic. Cloud's gaseous form began to shift and swirl as the Nebulan prepared to respond. The containment field flickered slightly, allowing wisps of the being's essence to drift into the classroom atmosphere before drawing back into cohesion. The effect was hypnotic and slightly unsettling. All of these presentations share one fundamental flaw. Cloud's translated voice carried undertones that suggested amusement at the obvious oversight. They assume warfare must be conducted against external enemies. The Nebulans learned long ago that the most effective military strategy involves being inside your enemies' defenses before they know you're there. The holographic display filled with images that made several cadets shift uncomfortably in their seats. Nebulan infiltration techniques allowed them to enter enemy vessels, installations, and even biological beings themselves. Footage showed gaseous forms slipping through ventilation systems, seeping through hull breaches too small for solid beings to exploit, and emerging from unexpected locations to neutralize threats from within. While other species develop weapons and armor, we become the environment our enemies must survive in, Cloud continued. Breathe our essence and we can influence your thoughts. Allow us into your air systems and we control your life support. Underestimate our intelligence and we become the ghost in your machines. The presentation showed strategic applications that went far beyond simple infiltration. Nebulons could gather intelligence by existing undetected in enemy spaces, sabotage critical systems without leaving evidence, and conduct psychological warfare by making enemies doubt their own perceptions. Alex observed how each presentation had grown more dramatic and personal as species pride took control of academic discussion. The evidence was impressive, the capabilities genuine, but something important was missing from every argument. Each species was presenting their case in isolation, as if galactic warfare existed in a vacuum where only one type of advantage mattered. Professor Helm watched the presentations with the expression of someone who had seen this exact performance countless times. His scarred face showed approval for the quality of the arguments, while suggesting that the real lesson had yet to begin. The debate was approaching its crescendo, and Alex suspected the next phase would reveal whether these impressive military capabilities translated into the kind of comprehensive deadliness the question actually asked about. The formal presentations had ended, but the classroom energy remained electric with competitive tension. Professor Helm allowed the discussion to continue organically, knowing that the most revealing moments often came when cadets spoke from passion rather than preparation. A temporal cadet named Flo raised a shimmering hand, their form appearing to move slightly faster than normal time. "We haven't discussed the most obvious advantage in warfare," they said, their words carrying the strange echo effect of accelerated temporal fields. "Control over time itself makes every other capability irrelevant. The temporals can age enemy forces into dust, heal our own wounds by reversing localized time, or accelerate our movements to make Swift's speed look stationary." Several cadets nodded respectfully. The temporal's abilities were well documented and genuinely terrifying in application. Flo continued their argument while the hologram showed time-based combat techniques that seemed to violate several laws of physics. When you can slow your enemies to a crawl while operating at normal speed, when you can reverse damage to your equipment and personnel, when you can see multiple timeline possibilities and choose the most advantageous outcome, conventional warfare becomes a solved problem. Blade, a cadet from the silicon-based shard species, activated their own presentation before Flo had completely finished. The crystal-like being's voice came through harmonic resonance rather than vocal cords, creating an eerie music-like quality to their words. "The temporals manipulate time, but the shards reshape matter itself," Blade announced, while images showed their species' incredible ability to restructure atomic bonds through controlled vibration. "Our bodies are living weapons that can become harder than diamond or flexible like liquid metal. We don't carry tools because we become whatever tool the situation requires." The holographic display demonstrated shard warriors reshaping their limbs into bladed weapons, forming shield configurations that could deflect energy attacks, and even splitting into multiple smaller forms for tactical advantage. It was genuinely impressive and slightly disturbing to watch beings who treated their own physical structure as completely malleable. Alex noticed how each new presentation attempted to trump the previous ones by introducing capabilities that seemed to bypass the other's advantages entirely. Time manipulation beat energy control, matter manipulation beat time control, and presumably someone would claim an ability that transcended matter itself. Echo, a void-touched cadet whose species existed partially outside normal spacetime, proved Alex's prediction correct. "All of these abilities assume warfare must be conducted within the normal dimensional framework," Echo stated, their semi-transparent form flickering between visible and invisible. "The void-touched operate from dimensions where your weapons cannot reach and your defenses cannot function. We strike from angles that don't exist in normal space." The pattern was becoming clear and slightly ridiculous. Each species presented their ultimate advantage as the obvious solution to galactic warfare, while completely ignoring how other capabilities might counter or circumvent their strengths. Alex found himself wondering if anyone was thinking about warfare as a system, rather than a collection of individual superpowers. Roth's patience finally snapped. "This is getting ridiculous," the massive Drex growled, his claws extending slightly in frustration. Half of these abilities are theoretical or limited to specialized conditions. The Drex have actual conquest records and proven battlefield effectiveness across every type of environment and enemy. Proven against whom? Swift countered, antennae bristling with irritation. The Mantari defeated Drex forces in the Battle of Three Moons using nothing but superior speed and coordination. Your armor means nothing when the enemy is too fast to target effectively. The Battle of Three Moons was a tactical withdrawal. Roth shot back, rising from his seat, and it required a 10-to-1 numerical advantage, plus favorable terrain. In equal numbers on neutral ground, Drex forces have never lost to Mantari swarms. Prism's crystalline form pulsed with agitated colors. Both species are debating ground-based tactics when orbital bombardment makes surface combat obsolete. The Quartz Collective ended the siege of Bright Harbor by channeling a solar flare directly into the planet's atmosphere. No amount of speed or armor protects against starfire. Cloud's gaseous form rippled with what might have been laughter. Orbital bombardment assumes you can maintain fleet cohesion when your enemy is inside your ships, sabotaging your systems from within. The Nebulans have never needed to destroy enemy forces directly, because we turn their own weapons against them. Professor Helm watched the escalating argument with growing interest. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen, though he suspected his students didn't realize. They were proving a point about the limitations of their own thinking rather than the superiority of their species. The debate devolved into multiple simultaneous arguments as species pride completely overwhelmed academic discussion. Temporal cadets argued with void touched about dimensional superiority. Shard students demonstrated their matter manipulation abilities on their desk furniture, prompting protests from academy maintenance protocols. The energy-based photon cadets began flickering through the visible spectrum in what appeared to be their equivalent of aggressive posturing. Through all the chaos, Alex continued taking notes. The human found the entire discussion fascinating from an anthropological perspective, but increasingly disconnected from any realistic assessment of galactic-scale military threat. Each species was essentially arguing that their unique evolutionary advantage made them the ultimate predator, while ignoring the complex realities of interstellar politics and warfare. Enough. Professor Helm's voice cut through the arguments with sufficient authority to silence even the most heated exchanges. You're all proving my point beautifully, though not in the way you intended. The classroom fell quiet as cadets realized their passionate debates had devolved into childish bickering. Several looked embarrassed by their loss of academic composure, while others still glared at their opponents with undisguised hostility. Every presentation has focused on your species' greatest strength, while assuming that warfare is simply a contest between individual capabilities. Helm continued, his scarred face showing disappointment. You're thinking like warriors instead of strategists, focusing on battles instead of wars, considering tactics instead of the larger questions of galactic power. Swift's antennae drooped slightly. Professor, are you suggesting our analysis is flawed? I'm suggesting your analysis is incomplete, Helm replied, his yellow eyes sweeping across the assembled cadets. True deadliness in galactic terms isn't about who wins individual battles. It's about who shapes the conditions under which all battles are fought. The professor paused, allowing that statement to sink in before continuing. You've spent this entire discussion debating which species has the best weapons, the strongest defenses, or the most impressive special abilities. But none of you have asked the more important question: which species changes the rules of the game entirely? Alex looked up from his notes, suddenly paying much closer attention. Professor Helm's shift in focus suggested the real lesson was finally beginning, and the human suspected it would be more complex than a simple comparison of military capabilities. The classroom remained silent as cadets considered this new perspective. Several began to look uncertain about their earlier arguments, realizing that their presentations might have missed something fundamental about the nature of galactic warfare and power projection. Professor, Helm's gaze swept across the room one more time before settling on the back corner, where Alex sat quietly with his notebook. Perhaps, the old warrior said with what might have been the beginning of a smile, we should hear from our human cadet before reaching any conclusions. Every head in the classroom turned toward Alex, who suddenly found himself the center of attention in a way he had carefully avoided throughout the semester. Alex felt 30 pairs of eyes focused on him with an intensity that made the classroom air seem thicker. Throughout the semester, he had become comfortable with being overlooked, the unremarkable human who contributed thoughtfully to discussions, but never dominated them. Now, Professor Helm's invitation had placed him at the center of attention in the most uncomfortable way possible. "I appreciate the opportunity, Professor," Alex said carefully, his voice steady despite the sudden scrutiny. "But I'm still learning. These cadets have presented impressive analyses of their species' capabilities. I'm not sure what I could add to such thorough presentations." Roth's laugh was a low rumble that seemed to shake the reinforced furniture. "Modest as always, Alex. Don't worry, we don't expect much. Humans are known for being diplomatic, not dangerous." Several other cadets chuckled, not unkindly, but with the casual dismissal that had characterized their attitude toward the lone human throughout the semester. Swift's compound eyes regarded Alex with something that might have been sympathy, while Prism's crystalline form showed colors that suggested benevolent condescension. Cloud's gaseous form rippled in what had become recognizable as their version of gentle amusement. Indeed, no offense intended toward our human classmate, but what military advantages could a species offer when they lack natural weapons, armor, environmental adaptation, or any of the special abilities we've discussed? Professor Helm's scarred face showed an expression that Alex had learned to recognize over the months of classes. The old Drex warrior wore that look when he was about to spring a trap that his students had walked into without realizing it. The professor's yellow eyes held a gleam that suggested the real lesson was finally about to begin. "An interesting assumption," Helm said slowly, his gaze never leaving Alex's face. "That military effectiveness requires natural weapons or innate special abilities. Tell me, Cadet Reed, do you agree with that assessment?" Alex set down his stylus and closed his notebook, suddenly realizing that Professor Helm wasn't inviting him to participate in the discussion. The professor was offering him the opportunity to completely reframe it. The human had spent the semester observing his classmates' thinking patterns, their assumptions about power and conflict, and their fundamental blind spots about the nature of galactic warfare. "With respect, Professor," Alex said, rising from his seat with deliberate slowness, "I think my fellow cadets are asking the wrong question entirely." The classroom's attention sharpened noticeably. Several cadets exchanged glances, uncertain whether the quiet human was about to embarrass himself with a poorly considered argument or surprise them with insights they hadn't expected. Alex moved toward the front of the classroom, not with Swift's lightning speed or Roth's intimidating mass, but with the measured pace of someone who had thought carefully about what he was going to say. "Everyone has focused on the question of which species is deadliest in terms of individual combat capabilities or specialized abilities. But Professor Helm asked about deadliness in galactic terms." He reached the holographic controls and paused, looking back at his classmates with an expression that several would later describe as unsettlingly calm. "The question isn't who wins battles. The question is who determines whether battles happen at all, under what conditions, and what the consequences of victory or defeat actually mean." Flo, the temporal cadet, flickered slightly faster through their time acceleration. "Are you suggesting that military capability isn't the primary factor in galactic deadliness?" "I'm suggesting that military capability is just one tool among many," Alex replied, activating the holographic display. Instead of showing weapon demonstrations or battle footage, the projection filled with star charts marking trade routes, diplomatic stations, and resource distribution networks across known space. "Before we discuss who's the most dangerous, maybe we should ask what makes a species dangerous at the galactic level. Is it the ability to win individual fights? The capacity to conquer worlds? Or is it something more fundamental about how they interact with the basic structures of interstellar civilization?" Blade's harmonic voice carried a note of confusion. "Surely conquest and military dominance are the obvious measures of species-level threat?" Alex's expression remained thoughtfully neutral as he manipulated the holographic display, highlighting different aspects of galactic infrastructure. "That's exactly the assumption I think we need to examine. Every presentation today has focused on direct confrontation, on scenarios where species meet in battle and determine superiority through force. But how often does galactic conflict actually work that way?" The hologram shifted to show historical data about the major conflicts of the past millennium: trade disputes, resource negotiations, diplomatic tensions, economic pressures, technological dependencies, and cultural influences. Military battles were visible in the data, but they appeared as relatively small components of much larger strategic competitions. The Drex have conquered 47 worlds through military superiority, Alex continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that made several cadets sit up straighter. That's impressive and represents genuine military capability. But how many worlds have the Drex influenced through trade relationships, technological exchange, cultural attraction, or economic dependency? How many conflicts did they avoid entirely because potential enemies decided that cooperation offered better outcomes than confrontation? Roth's claws extended slightly, not in threat but in the Drex equivalent of nervous fidgeting. Are you suggesting that military capability is less important than economic influence? I'm suggesting that military capability only matters if you're forced to use it, Alex replied, making adjustments to the holographic display that highlighted the interconnected nature of galactic civilization, and the most dangerous species might be the ones who ensure they're never forced to rely on military solutions alone. The classroom had become very quiet. Professor Helm leaned back in his chair, watching his students' faces as they began to grapple with a completely different framework for understanding galactic power and threat. Assessment. Prism's crystalline form pulsed with colors that suggested deep thought. You're talking about strategic influence rather than tactical superiority. I'm talking about the difference between being feared and being essential, Alex said, his voice carrying a weight that made several cadets look at him with new attention. Between being respected for your ability to destroy and being valued for your contributions to civilization. Between winning wars and never needing to fight them in the first place. The holographic display now showed a complex web of interdependencies that connected every major species and star system in known space. Trade relationships, technological exchanges, diplomatic protocols, cultural influences, and resource distributions created a network of mutual dependence that made simple military conquest look crude and primitive by comparison. So, Alex said, looking around the classroom at faces that showed a mixture of confusion, interest, and growing unease. When we ask about the deadliest species in galactic terms, maybe we should ask which species has made themselves so integrated into the fundamental structure of interstellar civilization that threatening them would damage everyone else. Which species has become so valuable as allies and so costly as enemies that other species choose cooperation over conflict not out of fear, but out of rational self-interest? The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet moments. This wasn't the pause of students thinking about answers to familiar questions. This was the silence of minds trying to process a completely new way of understanding the question itself. Professor Helm's scarred face showed what might have been approval, but he remained silent, allowing the moment to develop naturally. Alex stood at the front of the classroom, no longer the overlooked human in the back corner, but suddenly the focus of attention in a way that felt both uncomfortable and oddly inevitable. Alex could feel the weight of expectation in the classroom as his fellow cadets waited for him to explain his cryptic statements about essential versus feared species. The holographic display still showed the complex web of galactic interdependencies, but now he needed to demonstrate how this theoretical framework applied to real-world examples of species behavior and strategic thinking. Let me give you a practical example, Alex said, manipulating the controls to focus on a specific region of space. The siege of Corval Station, fought between the Drex hegemony and the Mentari swarm approximately 2 centuries ago. Both sides committed massive military resources to control a strategic choke point in the outer rim trade routes. The hologram showed the military engagement in detail. Drex heavy assault formations clashing with Mentari rapid strike swarms in a battle that lasted 6 months and resulted in enormous casualties on both sides. It was exactly the type of military confrontation that had dominated the earlier presentations. Now, Alex continued, let me show you what was happening in the same region at the same time, but involving a completely different approach to the same strategic objective. The display shifted to show supply lines, medical stations, communication networks, and support infrastructure throughout the combat zone. Suddenly, a new element became visible in the data. Small groups of humans providing essential services to both sides of the conflict. Human medical teams treating casualties from both armies. Human engineers maintaining communication networks that both sides depended on. Human traders supplying resources that neither the Drex nor Mentari could produce efficiently in a combat environment. Human diplomats facilitating prisoner exchanges and casualty evacuations. Swift's antennae twitched with confusion. That's just standard neutral humanitarian assistance. Most species provide that during major conflicts, do they? Alex asked, highlighting specific data points that showed the scope and critical nature of human involvement. Let's look at the details. The Drex Medical Corps could handle their own combat casualties, but human medics were the only ones trained to treat both Drex and Mantari physiology with equal effectiveness. When prisoner exchanges became necessary, both sides trusted human medical teams to ensure their wounded soldiers received proper care. The hologram expanded to show communication infrastructure. The quantum communication relays that both armies used for strategic coordination were designed by humans and maintained by human technicians. When the Mantari attempted to sabotage Drex communications and the Drex tried to intercept Mantari transmissions, both sides discovered that disrupting the human-maintained networks would blind them as much as their enemies. Roth's massive frame shifted uncomfortably. Surely neither side was dependent on human assistance for basic military operations, weren't they? Alex responded, pulling up resource flow charts that painted a disturbing picture of military dependency. The specialized metals required for Drex armor manufacturing came from asteroid mining operations run by human companies. The high-energy nutrients that sustained Mantari warriors during extended combat came from human agricultural installations. The quantum processors that enabled both species' advanced targeting systems were manufactured in human orbital facilities. The classroom had become very quiet as the implications began to sink in. Cloud's gaseous form rippled with what might have been discomfort. Are you suggesting that humans deliberately made themselves indispensable to both sides of a military conflict? I'm suggesting that humans recognized an opportunity to provide valuable services to both sides while establishing relationships that transcended the immediate conflict. Alex replied, his tone remaining academically neutral. When the siege of Corville Station finally ended in a negotiated settlement, both the Drex and Mantari discovered that their military objectives had become secondary to maintaining the support relationships that had kept their forces operational. The holographic display showed the aftermath of the siege, trade agreements, technology sharing protocols, medical cooperation treaties, and diplomatic frameworks that created lasting connections between species that had been bitter enemies just months earlier. Prism's crystalline form pulsed with agitated colors. That's not military deadliness. That's simply effective diplomacy and resource management. Is it? Alex asked, manipulating the display to show similar patterns across dozens of other conflicts throughout galactic history. Let me show you the Outer Colony Rebellion, the Void Wars, the Crystal Expansion, and the Great Migration Crisis. In every major galactic conflict of the past 500 years, you'll find the same pattern. The hologram filled with data that painted an increasingly unsettling picture. In every major war, humans appeared not as primary combatants but as essential support infrastructure. They provided medical care, communication networks, resource processing, transportation services, and diplomatic mediation that all other species came to depend on. Humans don't win wars through superior firepower or special abilities, Alex continued, his voice taking on a quality that made several cadets shift nervously. They win by making themselves so useful to all sides that eliminating them would cripple everyone else's ability to conduct warfare effectively. Flo's temporal acceleration flickered with agitation. That's not winning. That's just survival through utility. Alex's expression remained calm, but something in his eyes suggested depths that his classmates had never noticed before. Let me ask you a question. If your species needed to conduct major military operations tomorrow, how many critical systems would require human-designed components, human-maintained infrastructure, or human-provided services? The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Every cadet in the room was mentally reviewing their species' military capabilities and realizing how many seemingly minor but absolutely essential elements depended on human involvement. The quantum drives that power your faster than light travel were developed through human theoretical physics. The translation protocols that allowed different species to communicate effectively in combat situations were created by human linguists. The standardized emergency medical procedures that keep wounded soldiers alive long enough to receive species-specific Treatment were established by human military medics. The holographic display now showed the current state of galactic infrastructure, with human involvement highlighted in red. The result was startling. Nearly every major system, from transportation networks to communication protocols to resource distribution chains, showed significant human integration. But that's just practical cooperation. Blade's harmonic voice carried uncertainty that suggested the Shard cadet was beginning to understand something disturbing. Species working together for mutual benefit. Exactly, Alex replied, and his smile was neither threatening nor reassuring. It was simply acknowledgement of a fact that everyone in the room was starting to grasp. Humans have spent centuries making themselves practically indispensable to galactic civilization. Not through conquest or intimidation, but by becoming so thoroughly integrated into the basic infrastructure of interstellar society that removing them would cause everything else to collapse. Echo's semi-transparent form flickered with agitation. Are you saying humans have deliberately created dependencies to ensure their survival? I'm saying humans recognize that in a galaxy full of species with natural weapons, armor, speed, energy manipulation, and reality-altering abilities, the path to long-term security wasn't through becoming the strongest predator, Alex replied. It was through becoming the species that all the other predators need to function effectively. The classroom atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had begun as an academic discussion about military capabilities had become something much more unsettling. Professor Helm watched his students' faces as they processed the implications of what they were learning about their quiet human classmate and his species' approach to galactic survival. When you're asking about the deadliest species in galactic terms, Alex said quietly, maybe the answer isn't the one with the best weapons. Maybe it's the one that's made weapons irrelevant, by ensuring that attacking them would be an act of civilization-wide suicide. The holographic display continued to show the web of dependencies that connected human services to every major species and star system in known space, painting a picture of strategic positioning that was both brilliant and deeply disturbing in its implications. The holographic display continued to pulse with red indicators showing human integration throughout galactic infrastructure, while the classroom remained locked in uncomfortable silence. Alex could see his fellow cadets processing the implications of what he had revealed, their expressions shifting from confusion to understanding to something approaching unease. Professor Helm finally spoke, his scarred voice carrying the weight of someone who had suspected this truth for years but never heard it articulated so clearly. Cadet Reed, you're suggesting that humans have essentially made themselves the nervous system of galactic civilization. Not just the nervous system, Professor, Alex replied, manipulating the holographic controls to show additional layers of human involvement. Look at the data more carefully. Humans aren't just providing services that other species could theoretically replace given enough time and resources. They've positioned themselves as the critical interface between species that couldn't otherwise cooperate effectively. The display showed diplomatic protocols, trade standardization, medical cross-training, and technological compatibility frameworks. In every case, humans served as the universal translators, mediators, and bridge builders that made complex multi-species cooperation possible. The Drex and Mantari couldn't treat each other's wounded effectively, but both could work with human medical teams trained in both physiologies. The Quartz Collective and the Nebulons couldn't communicate directly, due to the incompatibility between energy-based and gaseous consciousness, but both could interface through human intermediaries who understood both forms of awareness. Roth's claws extended and retracted nervously as he processed this information. Are you saying humans deliberately position themselves as universal intermediaries? I'm saying humans recognize that in a galaxy of diverse species with different strengths, environmental needs, communication methods, and cognitive frameworks, there was enormous value in becoming the universal adapter that allowed everyone else to work together, Alex replied, and they pursued that role systematically across every aspect of galactic civilization. Cloud's gaseous form rippled with what was clearly agitation now. But that would mean human involvement in galactic affairs isn't just helpful, it's essential, Alex finished quietly. Remove humans from galactic civilization, and you don't just lose one species with particular capabilities. You lose the connecting tissue that holds the entire system together. The implications were staggering as they sank in. Swift's compound eyes darted between the holographic display and Alex's face. How long has this been going on? Since first contact, Alex replied, calling up historical data that showed the pattern extending back to humanity's initial emergence onto the galactic stage. When humans first encountered other species, they were clearly outmatched in every conventional measure of power and capability. So they offered what they could: curiosity, adaptability, and an apparently genuine interest in understanding how other species thought and functioned. The hologram showed early human exploration and contact missions, instead of the military expeditions or resource exploitation campaigns that characterized most species' expansion. Human contact followed a pattern of scientific study, cultural exchange, and service provision. Other species saw humans as harmless and potentially useful, so they were allowed to establish small populations throughout galactic space. Human traders, researchers, medics, engineers, and diplomats spread across known space not as conquerors, but as welcomed guests providing valuable services. Prism's crystalline form had shifted to deep blue colors that indicated profound unease. And no one noticed the pattern? Why would they? Alex asked, highlighting the gradual nature of human integration. Each individual human presence was small, helpful, and apparently harmless. Human medical teams improved survival rates. Human engineers solved compatibility problems. Human diplomats facilitated communication between species that couldn't understand each other directly. Every human contribution made life better for the species they worked with. The holographic display showed the accumulative effect over time. Small human populations providing essential services had grown into comprehensive networks of dependency that now touched every aspect of galactic civilization. Echo's semi-transparent form flickered with agitation, but surely someone must have realized the strategic implications. Of what? Alex asked, his tone still academically neutral, but his eyes showing depths that made several cadets look away. Of humans making themselves useful? Of humans helping other species solve problems and work together more effectively? What strategic threat did that appear to represent to species with natural weapons, armor, speed, energy manipulation, and reality-altering abilities? The question hung in the air while everyone in the classroom grappled with the answer. Humans had appeared to be the weakest species in galactic space, surviving through usefulness rather than strength. No one had perceived them as a threat, because they genuinely weren't threatening in any conventional sense. Flo's temporal acceleration stuttered as the temporal cadet processed the implications. So humans became essential to galactic civilization by being helpful. Humans became essential to galactic civilization by being indispensable, Alex corrected. There's a difference. Being helpful means people appreciate you. Being indispensable means people can't function without you. Professor Helm's expression had shifted to something approaching professional admiration mixed with personal concern. And now? Now, Alex said, calling up current dependency analyses that painted a stark picture. Human services touch every critical system in galactic civilization. Communication networks, medical protocols, transportation infrastructure, resource distribution, diplomatic frameworks, technological standards, and military support systems all depend on human involvement to function effectively. The holographic display showed what would happen if human services were suddenly withdrawn from galactic civilization. Communication breakdowns between species, medical systems unable to handle cross-species casualties, transportation networks grinding to halt without human-maintained compatibility protocols, and diplomatic relationships collapsing without human intermediaries. The deadliest species in galactic terms, Alex said quietly, isn't the one with the best weapons or the most impressive special abilities. It's the one whose removal would cause the collapse of galactic civilization itself. Blade's harmonic voice carried a note of something approaching fear. Are you threatening us? Alex looked genuinely surprised by the question. Threatening you? Why would humans threaten anyone? We've spent centuries building relationships, providing services and making life better for every species we've encountered. Threatening our friends and partners would be completely contrary to everything humans have worked to achieve. The reassurance was somehow more disturbing than an outright threat would have been. Alex's sincere expression and calm tone made it clear that he genuinely viewed other species as friends and partners, while simultaneously revealing that human survival strategy had made those friends completely dependent on human cooperation. Besides, Alex continued with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, why would humans need to threaten anyone? If other species want to maintain galactic civilization as it currently exists, they need human cooperation. If they don't want human cooperation, they're welcome to try rebuilding galactic infrastructure without us. Everyone gets to choose. The classroom had become very quiet as the full implications settled in. Professor Helm looked at his human student with new understanding and grudging respect. "Class dismissed," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned something he wasn't sure he wanted to know. As the other cadets filed out in unusual silence, several casting nervous glances back at Alex, the human remained at the front of the classroom. Calmly shutting down the holographic display, Professor Helm approached him, his scarred face showing curiosity mixed with caution. "Cadet Reed," the old Drex warrior said quietly, "that was either the most brilliant analysis of strategic positioning I've ever heard, or the most terrifying revelation about human intentions." Alex looked up with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the semester. "Professor, those aren't mutually exclusive possibilities." The human gathered his notes and headed for the door, leaving Professor Helm alone in the classroom to contemplate what his students had learned about the true nature of deadliness in galactic terms. Outside in the corridor, other cadets walked more quietly than usual, each lost in thought about what it meant to discover that the species they had dismissed as harmless had been systematically making itself indispensable to their survival. The question of galactic deadliness had been answered, but none of them were entirely comfortable with the conclusion.